All right, so let's go now to the United Kingdom, and Olly Barrat joins us from London. Olly, good evening. I understand you have some breaking news for us.
Yes, this has happened in the last moments. We've had confirmation from Lord David Wolfson. He is a peer who sits in the House of Lords, but he is also a government Justice Minister, and he says he is resigning from government over the breaches of lockdown rules that have become clear in recent weeks and months, but have seen this week fines handed to the Prime Minister himself, Boris Johnson, as well as his wife and his Finance Minister, Rishi Sunak, for breaching COVID regulations with gatherings and parties. And Lord Wolfson has written a fairly astonishing letter to a British Prime Minister referencing what he calls repeated rule-breaking and breaches of the criminal law in Downing Street. He says that those are inconsistent with the rule of law for that conduct to pass with impunity. He says, consistent with my obligations as a Justice Minister to support and uphold the rule of law, I have no option, he says, to resign. And also a key part of this letter that is potentially interesting to an international audience. He says, we can only credibly defend democratic norms abroad if we are and are seen to be resolutely committed to both the observance of the law and also to the rule of law. So here you have a Justice Minister resigning from government, saying to the Prime Minister, who's been found effectively found guilty of breaching his own legislation, that he feels he had to resign, but also he's saying we can't go around lecturing other countries on their democracy and observance of rule of law in their countries when this is happening in ours.
So, Olly, this is all about Partygate, and we know that the Prime Minister and Rishi Sunak have had fines. But is this resignation going to increase pressure on them because there are calls for them to step aside over this? Or do you think they're still going to be safe?
It absolutely increases the pressure, and now what we have to watch for is whether it leads to any other momentum, whether it's an isolated resignation we end up talking about here, or whether some other Conservative MPs or peers or officials feel that they have to consider their positions, that they feel they have to take a moral stance similar to that which is being taken by Lord David Wolfson here. It may well be that Boris Johnson rides this particular episode out, and part of the reason for that is that there's no real clear challenger to him at the moment. It's Conservative MPs who get to decide really if they want to unseat the Prime Minister by mounting a leadership challenge, and it doesn't seem at the moment that there is the momentum behind that kind of endeavour. There really haven't been a raft of MPs coming out after these fines for a gathering in Downing Street on Boris Johnson's birthday in June 2020. We haven't seen a raft of MPs coming forward. They think that now is the moment to change leader. In fact, dozens of them say they need to stick with Boris Johnson at a time of war, but it really, more than that, boils down to the fact they don't feel they have a ready-made successor that they can replace him with.
I would imagine for the British public it's about trust. If your Prime Minister says one thing and does another, that is not a good position to be in. And it's a difficult time for the British public. We're just hearing news that the UK is recording the fastest price rises in 30 years. People having to choose between heating their homes and eating. Tell us more about what's driving the price rise and how it's affecting people.
Yes, inflation hitting multi-decade highs, and that's partly to do with rising energy prices that people are seeing all over the world, and that is feeding into rising prices across the board. That does come down to food and clothing and hospitality. Wages are rising too. Unemployment is low, but the wages aren't rising as fast as the prices are, and so the standards of living are dropping. In fact, the Office for Budget Responsibility, in its predictions recently, said that we're seeing the biggest living standards squeeze in the UK since the 1950s. So actually for many people that's much more of a concern than whether Boris Johnson did or didn't enjoy a slice of birthday cake against the rules that lockdown had in place back during the peak of the pandemic. But for many others who perhaps lost relatives or didn't see family members during that period, they retain a great deal of anger about all of this. We have local elections coming up in May, by the way, And if they are an absolute pasting for the Conservatives, then many Conservative MPs may well look again at that point and decide that it might be time to change leader. If Boris Johnson does better than expected in May, then perhaps we can say that the British public are looking to other things, perhaps the war in Ukraine and his response to that. But yes, trust has absolutely been damaged in Boris Johnson and his government by all of this. The polls just tell you that over and over again.
Thank you very much. That's our London correspondent, Olly Barrat, bringing us the breaking news that the Justice Minister has resigned this evening over the double standards around Partygate.